we have another episode of Justice Then, Justice Now. Our guest today is Dave Gaddis. Dave is retired from the Drug Enforcement Administration. His background is he was an agent here in Miami. He was overseas. I met him for the first time when he was in Costa Rica on a case, which he almost got me fired for working narcotics with customs, which I wasn't supposed to do. But it was a favor, as I told the SAC. But that went well. But he did get me a nice commendation, so it helped. We've been friends for years. Dave went to Onward to become the country attaché in Bogota, Colombia, at the height of the drug smuggling and the conversion to heroin, which happened over there, and then ended up in Mexico City, working there with the Mexican movement of the smuggling of narcotics. Retired in 2011 from the DEA. He's an expert on everything. He's testified at Congress. But more important, he started out as a street agent in Miami, which was in the late 80s and early 90s, a very busy period. He has this book out that I've read, The Noble Experiment. It starts out with him as a street agent and follows his career up through the Drug Enforcement Administration. He talks about the policy changes and everything else in it. It has my highest recommendation, and Dave's character is beyond reproach, and he will tell it like it is. Thank you, Dave, for coming on. It's great to see you.
My pleasure. You bet, Toby. It was great to hear from you again.
Same here. This is Jeff Thomas. Jeff is a very good friend of mine. He's the producer of all this kind of stuff and an expert in training me as I go along. So I'll let you.
And I'm the big dummy, so I get to ask all the dummy questions, so all the, less informed people in the audience can get a translated, version for all of us dummies.
Well, that's essentially why I wrote The Noble Experiment, because I wanted to show people who didn't know about federal law enforcement what it's really like and how fun it could be.
Perfect. Then you're the perfect guest. So the way we have been opening up, and it's worked pretty well, if you can just briefly go over, your early life, where you're from, you're growing up, and your parents, and what led you to start a career in law enforcement.
Well, Jeff, you got to buy the book.
Well, it's
just first chapter.
You got to give us a little teaser. I'm going to read it. You just got to get a little teaser. Get the hooks in.
Hey, listen, man. It was, that was one reason I wrote the book. The second reason was because I have a couple of kids, and as Toby knows, when you're in the job and you're working it, you don't talk much about it. A lot of the stuff that's happening in your case is you don't really want to talk about, to your family. I mean, it's not always pleasant things. In fact, it's rarely pleasant. In a way, I always joke that, my job was to make other people's world turn upside down, right? Because we were targeting the bad guys. And if their lives turned upside down, then I was doing my job. But I'm glad that it was written and the kids can look at it. And it basically all started when I was in college, right? I grew up in a military family. My dad was a Special Forces, Green Beret, Vietnam era guy. And he just showed me the importance of civil service. So I initially thought about military, but I just had something of a greater calling, it seemed to me, and it was going to be in law enforcement. I really don't know why, but I decided I wanted to be a part of the law enforcement community. And for a couple of years, as a junior and senior in college, I probably applied for every ABC agency you could think of, including the Legacy Customs Service. But only two agencies decided to interview me. One was the FBI, and the other was the DEA. So turns out that DEA had a bit of a more expedient hiring process than the FBI, and I ended up being hired by the DEA. Although I would have been disqualified by the FBI eventually, I understand, because I had radiokeratotomy eye surgery when I was in college. And the FBI was using that as a disqualifier at that time, as well as the military. They don't any longer, but they did at that time. But the DEA, they didn't have that requirement. So I ended up just sliding under the radar and getting hired with DEA. And that's how my career started.
Is that that's like still like fighter pilots and that kind of stuff can't have that passed, correct? Or is that like across the board okay now?
I'm absolutely certain that training fighter pilots have to have perfect natural vision.
Not even LASIK.
Now,
yeah.
I would think, let's say you're 40 years old, right? Or 30 years old, and you've been a pilot for 8 years, you might be able to get away with some of that modern LASIK stuff. But now, if you're a training pilot, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be able to qualify. And it's funny because when I first graduated high school, I actually went to the U.S. Air Force Academy preparatory school, which is also in Colorado Springs, Colorado, with the intent of being an Air Force Academy cadet and flying. I wanted to fly. It was in that year that my vision went to hell in a handbasket. And because for the first time in my life, I think I actually had to study. And the vision went pretty bad at the age of 19. And I realized that even if I had graduated from the academy, which would have been a fabulous education, I never would have been a pilot. So it kind of burst my bubble a little bit. So maybe a sorry excuse as to why I didn't continue to go on. I did receive an appointment to the academy, but I decided to turn to federal law enforcement at that time instead of the military.
So you went straight into the DEA, no local police background or anything, just straight in?
No, you can't do that. You have to have, or at least at that time in 1985, 86, you had to have 3 years full-time work experience, preferably as a law enforcement officer, the military, or some related field, probation, parole, anything like that. And while I was in college, I actually had an 11P to 7A job at the Madison County, Alabama Juvenile Detention Center. So I was a probation officer, an intake officer for juveniles, and I did that for 3 years while I was actually in college, which worked out very well. So I almost immediately qualified, at least on the application, after I had degreed. And turns out that the timing was perfect, right? That's life. Timing's always the important thing. And George Bush, 41, GW's dad was the president. And I'm sorry, he was the vice president at the time in 86. And Ronald Reagan, you remember Ronald and Nancy Reagan, Just Say No campaign. They were really focusing on trying to stop drugs and drug abuse. And they actually asked the vice president, George Bush, to oversee and activate the South Florida Task Force around 1985. Toby, you remember all that. There was a lot of attention back in Miami because that was ground zero for dope land, right?
Yeah.
And
I
with
was
that South
filling out-
Florida Task Force.
Yeah, and I was a member of that for they called it FJTG, and we used to complain because the customs agents, they had to fill out 2 forms, ROIs and DEA 6s, and the DEA agents had to do 6s. So
what's a ROI? I'm
report
familiar.
of investigation, and DEA 6 was their report of investigation.
Gotcha.
So what we'd have to do is sit at our typewriters with carbon copies and figure out how to submit the reports and the seizures. And I think we got shafted with that, Dave, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, but you guys, we'll get into it because I'm sure we'll get into it. We have
Border
plenty of
Search
time.
Authority, Title 21, all that. Yeah.
But I'll remind you of the FDIN, and we'll get back to that, I'm sure,
yes.
very, very soon in the conversation. And you guys own the FDIN most of the time. But no, I mean, it was great timing. They were hiring. There was a flood of basic agent trainees coming in. Not that they would hire just anybody, but I think I was part of a pool where I was included in some fabulous agent trainees at that time. It was 1986, and we had NYPD cops. We had folks like me that just kind of had a peripheral experience to law enforcement as a juvenile detention officer. We even had somebody who was a manager at McDonald's. So, I mean, they were really taking a lot of people at that time. And that individual who actually worked at McDonald's turned out to be one hell of a great agent. So you never know what your experience comes from that will essentially evolve and just create this persona of a great DEA agent or a federal agent in general, right? I remember working many cases with customs agents in South Florida, and we had a great time. And we all came from different backgrounds, different education levels. I only had a bachelor's degree at that time. And I don't know if people know this, but technically, you do not have to have a 4-year bachelor's degree to join the DEA. You didn't then, and you don't now. Now, as a practice, most of the people who are hired have some bachelor's degree, whether it's in humanities, behavioral sciences, science, or whatever. But technically, it's not required. So we got like, a whole group of different people. I remember when I was at the FBI Academy, which is where the DEA Academy in '86 was located in Quantico, Virginia. And one of the FBI agents, who was a really strong looking guy, real strappy guy, he had worked in a circus and was an elephant trainer.
Oh, God.
So how do you use that experience to become a federal agent?
I'm sure there's some crossover there.
I always thought it was, basically shoveling shit, right? If you learn to
Exactly.
shovel shit, you can be a DEA agent.
Yes.
And what mountain of shit is bigger than an elephant's?
Yeah, that's the top of the hill.
Or the U.S. drug problem.
Especially in the 80s.
Man, Toby, wasn't that something? The '80s was it was off the hook, really. It was an amazing experience. I was in a class of about 40 people, maybe 45. 34 ended up graduating because it's multi-month training, and some people just decide it's not for them, or they can't hack it. There's a physical training at the time, and then there's coursework and all this stuff. But I mean, nothing prepared anyone for Miami. And I was so thankful that DEA had sent me to Miami as a 24-year-old graduate of the academy instead of, Boise, Idaho. Nothing against Boise, Idaho. Today, there's drugs everywhere. But at that time, I mean, we weren't really working. You couldn't work ounce cases, which is where the rest of America worked. They were working multi-ounce cases, in some cases, gram cases, right? And conspiracies and whatnot. But in Miami, it was nothing to throw together a 5-10 kilo buy bust case. And buy bust is where, you set up with an informant and you meet the guy who wants to sell the dope. You show him a little money, some flash money, hopefully not at the same time, because we had plenty of shootings in Miami at that time. And of course, lots of people that would rip you off if they could. And then, you had 5 or 10 kilos of cocaine on the table, right? I mean, there are places, even at that time, Houston, Texas wasn't getting those kinds of cases because it was the mid 90s and Miami was the gateway to Latin America and the drug supply.
So how much did that schooling prepare you for getting into Miami and getting started, or was it mostly on the job training once you got there?
The school basically just taught us how to survive administratively.
Yes, 100%.
The senior agents in Miami taught you how to survive on the street, because you're not really dealing with true informants. And Toby can tell you, one of the most challenging parts. It's a great career. I called it my 25-year perpetual play date. It's a great career. It's so much fun. I recommend it for everybody. But there's one frustrating part about being a federal narc, and that is operating and managing your informants, because you don't have legit business owners. You don't have clergymen. You don't have great moms. Sometimes you have moms, but they're not great. And your informant is
We'll
somebody
talk
who's
about
actually,
those. Yes, the great moms.
so you know, you don't have that in training, man. And then when you're there, it all comes out, right? And you're trying to you're trying to drink it from a 5-foot fire hose, and you're trying to suck it in. And thank goodness you have those senior agents who with their experience, their 8, 10, 15, 20 years of experience, that can say, hey kid, it's okay. We're going to handle it this way. We're going to do it this way. But wait, the manual says we should actually go through this. And we're going to follow the manual, but I've got a shortcut, So there's a way to get things done, and legally, but the regulations. I remember actually when I joined DEA, I think the DEA Special Agents Manual was about 1.5 inches thick, and today it's probably about 4 inches thick. And that extra 2.5 inches is definitely mistakes that have been made by people like me.
That. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Plus, like the thickest section of the customs manual, it was undercover operations and handling informants. Uh-huh. I mean, that was where people got in trouble.
So, what was the biggest challenge with the informants? Like just not being able to trust them, or keeping them confidential, or what was the main overwhelming apparent thing that you discovered?
Every one of them wanted something. Every one of them had their agenda. I get it. We're all human. But if you're working with a defendant informant, they have a very dark background, right? They have probably witnessed homicides. They have certainly witnessed threats and extortion against individuals. They're a tough personality because they've lived through it, right? It's as if you're working with a mobster, right? A career mobster, right? So Toby and I are sitting here in Miami, and we ended up with an informant, and then informant's been with the Cali cartel or the Medellin cartel for, I don't know, 5 years, 4 years, whatever. I mean, they probably die after about 9 or 10 years. I mean, you don't last in those cartels very long.
No pension plan.
There's no pension plan, and there's no pink slip, except in the form of a bullet. So you're dealing with a rough crowd, right? That's the first thing. And second, I mean, they've got their own agenda, right? Either they're going to try to get off of some time because they're a defendant informant, they've been charged, and they know they have to cooperate in order to get less time, or they're on the outs of the cartel for one reason or another, or there's monetary incentive, right? And if there's simply monetary incentive to do it, you can't trust them, right? I mean, we had a case where a Colombian informant, a female, very attractive female in the late 80s, was working with our group, and she was sitting on about $4 million. And this was connected to the Ochoa cartel out of Medellin in the mid 80s. And we basically monitored her activities, and she was giving us a little bit of information, but she felt like she couldn't give up the money because if she did, they would kill her. And she's probably right. The Ochoa cartel were not friendly to enemies. And in the end, she moved it. I mean, 3 million became 4 million, 4 million became 6 million, 8 million. And then lo and behold, she ended up moving it, and it costed the DEA quite a bit, and the FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, a heck of a lot of spent time on surveillance. And that was one informant that skewered the investigation. Were we successful in the end? Yeah, I think at certain levels, but we didn't get the fat fish that we wanted, and it was because of that informant that had became a turncoat in the ninth inning of the program.
Is there any like
Did you ever experience anything like that, Toby? Were your
Well,
informants
yeah,
skewered on you?
yeah. I always assumed that, and it's terrible to say that they were wired from internal affairs or they were working for my ex-wife. I just had that mentality. It was a professional relationship, and that's the hard part of it. There's some of these people that you actually like. They have same interests and stuff like that, and you had to keep that line there in dealing with them. No matter any law enforcement officer that handles informants has to do that. So yeah, of course.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, one of my chapters is called Mangoes
Yes.
in the Noble Experiment, and it's about a defendant named Chichi. And I'd worked undercover. I brought a load in from the Guajira Peninsula of Colombia, and I don't know, it was 500 kilos, something like that. And then there was another, 1,000 pounds of weed that they insisted on throwing on the plane. And I worked with Chichi for undercover, of course, uh, for maybe, I don't know, 60 days, 70 days, something like that. And we actually kind of got to know each other. And, but of course, he doesn't know who I am, right? I was the brother-in-law of the pilot who had run mini loads for him in the past, gringo pilot. So it was natural for me to be his brother-in-law. And once we arrested him, which was kind of a violent arrest because he was on the run. He was on the lam for about maybe 2 weeks before we could actually put him down in Hialeah and took him down at a friend's house. But when we started talking to him in the Metropolitan Detention Center down there in South Dade,
By the zoo.
I really felt like I got to know him. That's right. I got to know him. It was the other zoo, right? The two-legged zoo. And he turned out to be a pretty cool cat, man. And I wrote a chapter about that simply because we connected. We kind of connected in a way, and I realized the human side to how it happened because he told me his life story. He never had an opportunity. He was brought over not long after the Mariel boat lift. He was relatively young and fell into the wrong crowd. Was making some easy, not a whole lot of money, but easy money, and so we ended up kind of bonding, as cop and drug trafficker, and it turned out to be a relationship to where he's out of prison now, and I hope he's doing well. Actually, I hope he's living a normal life, and he's about my age, so he's starting to slow down a bit. But I hope he's doing well. But there was that case in the chapter of Mangoes where we were running around and he was pointing out houses, flop houses where he said, okay, I picked up 40 kilos from that house. And then we would go a few blocks down and he said, I picked up 20 kilos here. I dropped off 80 kilos at this one. And so I'm just documenting it. And we finally went by a corner lot and there was this huge mango tree, beautiful ripe mangoes hanging off of it. I mean, they were purple. They were so beautiful. And he looked at that, and apparently he wasn't getting mangoes in federal prison. So he said, Dave, please let me pick a mango. And I said, you've been helping me. I'm going to let you pick a mango. I didn't know whose tree it was. It's private property, but it was in the front yard. It was over there on the side of the house. And there were a few there on the ground, right? So I said, okay, I'm going to let you pick a mango. But of course, he was handcuffed the whole time, right? So I unhandcuffed him, and I looked at him straight in his eyes and I said, Chichi, if you run, I'm going to shoot you. He said, no problem. So he gets out of the car. It's like a 1984 LeSabre, three of the lug nuts on each tire had been ripped off, from car chases and whatnot. I never would have been able to catch him. And He walks out there. He looks around the ground. He looks at a couple of mangoes. Nah, he can't. He's not happy with that. I mean, this is a Cuban guy, right? He knows a mango. So he looks up and he picks the perfect mango and he grabs a couple of the ones that were on the ground and he starts throwing it and throwing it. And I'm thinking, geez, this is going to get me in trouble. We got to get him back in the car, right? He gets one of the mangoes that he wanted. It falls down to the ground. He grabs it. He starts devouring it, just casually walking back to the car. And I said, "Are you happy now?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, thank you. Muchas gracias, David. Muchas gracias." And then I get back into the car. I said, "Get in the car." And he doesn't get in the car. He's standing up. Doors open on the passenger side. He's not getting in the car. I get back out of the car and I look over the hood and he's just looking down the road. And I said, "Chichi, get in the car." He doesn't answer. He's looking down the road. And I thought for a quick second, this guy's going to rabbit on me. He's going to run. He was probably in one of his old neighborhoods, right? He would know the area much better than I. He took a sigh, big breath. He got back into the car. I handcuffed him. And we continued. He continued fingering stash houses for me for another couple of hours before we went back. And I asked him. I said, "Why didn't you get in the car when I told you?" And he says, "I miss it." He says, "I really miss it. The fresh mangoes, the fresh air of Miami." He says, "I just missed it, but you're treating me right. I'm going to treat you right, and I'm going to do this. You can count on me." So right before we get back to the DEA office, so we could confirm all the addresses, Toby, you'll remember this. I don't know if it's, it probably is current. But there used to be these umbrella stands where these young ladies would be selling hot dogs. And then they would have these bikinis.
I forgot all about that.
Toby told me about that.
You never saw those. And they were clad in these very.
Were they out at the airport? Were they out at the airport too?
Dude, they were everywhere.
Perimeter Road.
They were around the
Perimeter Road
Center.
there. Yeah.
I've seen photos.
Oh yeah. I mean, almost on every corner. they were modern day Starbucks. They were on every street corner. It had a little hot dog stand, little umbrella, and the girls were wearing bikinis, right? And they sell you these great hot dogs. And man, all the workers were around, and probably all the customs agents were around, a few DEA agents. And we ended up going by that umbrella stand. And then Chichi looks at it and he goes, "Mangoes! Can I stop and get those mangoes?" And I said, "No, Chichi, those are mangoes you will never have."
Yeah, Toby sent me a picture one time, and he was like, "This is what they used to do to distract all the customs agents while they flew stuff into the airport."
Yeah, when the Colombian flights came in at between 3 and 11, he knows. They were all out there on Perimeter Road. We thought they were working for him to distract us and the guys from the task force.
Would have been brilliant. Yeah. Brilliant move.
They were very sharp with that. They were very creative. I can't wait to hear the stories about Bogota and Mexico City, but from him.
So how early on in your DEA career were you like undercover on flights and flying and behind enemy lines?
I did all of my undercover in Miami and in Costa Rica. See, I left Miami in 1992, joined in 1986, worked 6 years in Miami. Then I ended up going to Costa Rica. Did some undercover in Costa Rica, but you have to get special permissions from the U.S. State Department, the ambassador, to work undercover because you're not on U.S. soil, right? And they're quite skittish about being undercover and falsifying your ID and doing things and being in places that you shouldn't be in, like strip bars or prostitution houses and that kind of stuff, which is totally legal in Costa Rica. But as you can see, the ambassador would not be very comfortable if you were photographed or caught in a place like that doing your undercover work. So by about 1994, I wasn't working undercover anymore, but I did most of it right there in Miami. And I was lucky enough to have some very good informants, which is as frustrating as they can be to work with. Toby can tell you, you have to have them,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. You can't do your job without them.
It's the peanut butter with bread, baby. You got to have them. And I had some great informants. I had one guy who was a red-haired Canadian, big old fat guy, who was a pilot, a very, very skilled pilot. And he was grabbed for smuggling a couple of tons of cocaine, but he had been doing it for probably 15, 20 years when he got caught. So he had some real deep hooks into suppliers in Colombia. So I was his brother-in-law, you know. I'm red-haired myself, and it's just with his recommendation, it was easy to work me in. So I had people like that, that was able for me to get in. I didn't really speak fluent Spanish during my 6.5 years in Miami. I was trying to learn it, but it's difficult, it took a few years for me to actually pick it up, and I was actually lucky enough to be sent to Spanish language school at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California for 6 months. And then I was able to establish a base, so I could begin speaking it. And when I came back, it was just, off I go, man. It was great because you really, and Toby could tell you, if you didn't speak Spanish, you were definitely disabled as an agent, because all the police officers, Miami-Dade, Metro-Dade, they Hialeah, I mean, they were all native speakers. So you kind of felt blind, right? If you couldn't speak the language. And I was lucky enough to pick that up. And that's how I ended up with the post in Costa Rica.
And then in Costa Rica, is it still like kind of like air smuggling and stuff, or is that around the time that it started kind of shifting to like Mexico?
No, this is pre that.
Pre
yeah.
Mexico. Yeah.
One of the questions I'm going to talk about with Dave is about, we had a big shift in seizures in Miami in the 90s, and it went from cocaine to heroin overnight. And it was unbelievable, the change that they had. I mean, we started, they always made me the stat guy because I didn't speak Spanish, so I didn't do that. I did limited undercover. Mine was in the gold industry and things like that. But he'll talk about that. But he was down there. You were the rep down there, right? Because that's where you got me in trouble. But that's okay.
Oh, I got to hear that story.
No, I was a journeyman, grade 13 special agent in Costa Rica, man. My boss, a guy named Ron Lard, who is considered the country attaché. We call them country attachés. They're the lead agents in any office of like 4 agents or less. And Ron was a great mentor. He was a great supervisor.
A great guy. Yeah.
Super, super cool guy. And so, he just kind of gave us a very long leash to do our jobs. He trusted our training. He trusted our experiences. But there were times when he said, "Hey, listen, you're pushing the envelope here. Time out. Let's think of another way, to achieve the same end." And I really enjoyed working for him. And that's when I met Toby. But where were we going with this? I can't remember now.
The transition to heroin and all that stuff?
No. I'll ask that later.
Okay,
we'll go into that later.
Yeah.
But it was funny. I went down with an undercover agent and an informant, and they didn't know each other. So, I mean, each other's roles, obviously, and that. And Dave was a tremendous help in Ron. And when I came back, because I worked for Customs, he needed paperwork to show for a reverse deal. And I said, I'll get you that, send it down there. And So they were had successful what they call a reverse sting down there with sham drugs. So I get called about 2 months later to the SAC's office, and our SAC, he had this deep voice and said, I heard over the intercom the entire office, Roach, come to my office. So I go in there and he goes, are you working money laundering in gold or are you working narcotics? And I said, well, no, I'm running undercover with that and doing that. He goes, well, I just got a commendation from the ambassador down there and the DEA deputy director for your fine work down there on this case like this. And I said, oh my God. And he produces a letter from Ron Lard and I'm in there and he goes like this. And, you know, we got along well with DEA in Miami and customs. Other areas of the country, they'd lock. But we had so much drugs, it was like, okay, who's going to be the lead? Flip a coin.
That's right.
That's exactly what it was like. And we'd laugh when we did controlled delivery somewhere. So I said, what was this all about? And I said, a favor. I just, you know, like the line from, you know, with Al Pacino in that movie, I forget the name of it, Carlito's Way. A favor will get you killed. He was like telling me, a favor, but we have to do paperwork on this. And I said, okay. But yeah, nice job hatting me out. So I told Dave, next time you come to Miami, we're going to have drinks. And I use your American Express card at Tobacco Road, which was a local dive hangout. So anyway, I was always grateful for that, by the way.
Yeah, I think I actually forged Ron Lard's signature. He never knew about that. I just basically wrote it down, right?
See, takes 30 years for the truth to come out, Jeff.
Check the spelling, seal the envelope. You're good. Check the spelling on the name, seal the envelope.
Yeah, he had a stamp in his desk probably and just sent that out.
See, that's what those senior agents taught you, both in customs, legacy customs, and the DEA, is that you know, they knew the line of things that you could get away with, and then they knew what you couldn't get away with. So don't be stupid and do nothing illegal. But if you bent a rule every now and then, it was okay.
Yeah.
So, if not, you're not trying, right?
It's called a favor, Jeff. Yeah. That's the word. Favor. It's not bending the rules. It's a favor.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So anyway, the book is great. I recommend it to everybody, not because Dave Gaddis is my friend, but it's inaccurate and starts out exactly how we're doing this discussion, working as agents, and then he progressed into management. And it's, you know, usually you see, and he was an executive in the government. He was an SES, which is Senior Executive Service. And usually they start at the top and then you read little things in there, but this is casework. I mean, that's what's, you know, and I have a book too. So, you know, Behind Blue Eyes, it's cases.
Right.
It's cases. And it's
a great book.
When Pete wrote it. Thank you. And when Pete wrote it, it was about the cases in the Marshal Service and then here and carrying 40 years. So, but again, Dave went down, and I can't think of a better person to head the office in Bogota at the time when he was there. And then obviously he did a great job. And as they do in the government, you can do one of two things. You can do a shitty job and you get transferred, and that happens. Or you can, you know, do a great job and they decide to move you at a different step. But you always go to a problem area, you know, because they'll put you in. It's like when I was an agent, they put me in different groups. They say, okay, we need this done and this. Okay, you know, and you don't take it personally. They just do that kind of stuff. So if you could pick up and tell us how you ended up in Bogota and that. And
man, you know, the career, as exciting as it is equaled by the surprise. You know, I went from Miami, like I said, very lucky to start in a place during the mid '80s. Probably wouldn't have wanted to be there at my age then because it was far too risky. But when you're a 24, 25, 26-year-old, I mean, you're just ready to take on the world, right? You're impetuous, you're aggressive, and you just want a lot of adventure. But I went from Miami to Costa Rica, from Costa Rica to Mexico. So I actually stayed 6 years overseas, and Costa Rica was, got to be honest, man, Costa Rica was a training ground for what was happening in Mexico. Because I transferred to Mexico in 1995, and that was when, the shit was hitting the fan and everything was going through Mexico, through the Central American and Caribbean to Central America to Mexico. And it was starting to really heat up. That was when Amado Carrillo Fuentes was tied into the Medellin cartel. And it just, they formed that alliance. So I was right there at that time, and really enjoyed it. And I'll tell you some stories about being in Mexico. Um, but then from Mexico, I ended up going to headquarters, which is what we call dead time. And because there's no fun, there's no street work, you're basically living vicariously through agents out there. And but you've got to do that, if you want to get promoted. And I was already in management because I had become a manager to be in Mexico the first time. And then I left there, ended up with a domestic um, assignment in North Carolina. And then after that, I ended up in Bogota. So you can't spring from a group supervisor to an SES. If you're going to be an SES and a regional director or a special agent in charge, you got to go through the steps, right? It's a ladder. You got to climb up the ladder. The same with every organization, whether it's ICE, DEA, FBI. So I ended up doing my mid-management level time in North Carolina and in DC, and then I was asked to take on the job for a promotion at the SES level in Bogota, and I left North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, specifically to go to Bogota, and that was in 2003, which was a fun time. So it just seemed like the timing always, I was very fortunate and lucky to have been in that location at that time. Why do I say 2003 was a great time to go to Bogota? Because that's when the right-wing paramilitaries, Pablo Escobar had been killed. The Medellin cartel was being dismantled. And there was a number of drug traffickers who were stepping up, and they were trying to take over, create a new a cartel, and they did so, and it became what was called the AUC, which was it's a Spanish acronym for the right wing paramilitaries, the Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia, and they grew into a force of like 30,000 soldiers, and they were paramilitary soldiers. They were tough, and they became a drug trafficking cartel, the greatest cartel that you can imagine, I believe. And I was there during that time when it was all happening. So we started targeting members of these AUC leaders, and in the end, although it could have been, at times it was very frustrating because of the levels of sophistication and the money that they had. We were able to succeed and grab lieutenants, captains, and eventually we were able to grab the top guys. And the AUC was dismantled, it demobilized. Politically, the president, a guy named Alvaro, help me, Toby, Alvaro Uribe.
Uribe,
Alvaro
yeah.
Uribe. Yeah, he ended up working up a peace process for that organization so the lower level guys could get out. And I was in the middle of that, man. So it was great. It was great. It's funny when a DEA agent is able to go from a place like Charlotte, North Carolina, where he's in charge of 5 offices in one state, to being in Bogota and being in the ground zero of all drug trafficking, both heroin and cocaine, around the world. It's an amazing change and amazing opportunities for someone, and I felt very, very lucky to find myself in those positions.
Yeah. So the from there you went to Mexico City, and there, and that was probably the last time I saw you when I was down there working as a PI.
That's right.
Bringing informants and the usual stuff that we do. Sometimes I think this job is like the mafia. To retire. I don't know about you. Do you play pickleball or anything like that, or no?
No, my friend, I'm a farmer.
Okay.
Don't let the Ralph Lauren fool
No,
you.
I
I'm a
noticed
farm.
things like that. That dressing and that.
I keep busy. I keep
You
busy.
are an SES,
growing.
Dave. So that's the head
I
of the totem pole.
completely abandoned that thought and that mentality. I actually grow potatoes and corn now and have a little livestock, and a place that I'll refer to as off the beaten path. And I really love it. Yeah, no pickleball for me. But you're right about an organization. It's a fraternity, and I mean that in both a male and female sense. You go around the world. It's one of the odd experiences in life where you can meet somebody, you can work a case with them or cases with them, not see them for 40 years, and then when you do see them, it doesn't seem like a day had passed.
Yep,
It's a lot of fun.
especially if you got a Heineken in front of you, that usually helps.
That's right. That's right. Although this is water, I wanted to be straightforward with you guys.
That was good.
No
That was good timing.
Not get too silly.
I timed it perfect, didn't I, Jeff? Yeah. Can you talk about your experiences as the country attaché in both Bogota and there? You touched on the AOC and what was happening there with the paramilitary buildup. What about, right now in the news, everything's about Mexico. It's about the border, and I have my opinions on it. And I think you know where they are with that, and it's creating the flow of narcotics, and hopefully that will change the policy on that just because of the safety factor to American citizens. But what was Mexico like? I mean, with the development of the major cartels out of there, with the Camarena case, I worked, and when I was a marshal in D.C., I was involved in that when Rene Verdugo Urquhart was crossed the border, shall we say, and in that personally too, with his transportation and all that to courts and things like that. It was a very, very sad day. We hadn't seen, I mean, you remember with the task force that Eddie Benitez and Ariel Rios were killed on Operation Florida, which in the early 80s, and put everybody on alert for safety and all that. But what was the experience like with Mexico transitioning to what they are today with drug smuggling?
I felt like when I left Colombia and went to Mexico in 2006, I was thrown out of the frying pan into the fire. Mexico is unparalleled in terms of the transnational drug threat. The idea of being able to stop the Mexican cartels is almost, to me, preposterous, because the connections and the influence of corruption in the country is unparalleled. I mean, there's nothing that I've seen like it. Not in Colombia, not in Asia. When we'll get to this, but when I finished my career, I was chief of global enforcement. So I was involved with casework throughout the globe, and there is no place like Mexico in terms of the influence of cartels. And well, one can argue that, okay, where do they get their arms? Some of it's from the United States. Okay, we'll take that hit, right? Yeah, maybe. We have illegal arms traffickers that are funneling weapons down to Mexico, but not all of them, right? Um, you can't even own a weapon if you're a private citizen unless it's below at a 38 caliber level pistol or below. Um, there are special permits for hunting weapons and stuff, for hunting rifles, shotguns and stuff, but it's set up in Mexico so that the corruption becomes the grease that keeps the wheels going throughout, the culture. And I'm not saying anything that would be a surprise to any Mexican citizen. They know that. They know that. There's lots of jokes about government corruption there. Are there good people in Mexico? You're damn right there are. Great, great people, real patriots. We had in our sensitive investigations unit, which was a special forces unit, trained, recruited, trained in the United States in Quantico. We had a guy. Uh, his name was Omar Ramirez Aguilar, and he was a terrific guy. He was a PhD candidate in Mexico University, and had a family, 4 kids. Was doing everything he could to save the country, and then he was murdered, right, by the Zetas. A couple of motorcycles went up next to him and took him out. So they're good people there, but man, Mexico was a different animal altogether. And your question about what was it like to manage, to be the director for Mexico? It quite frankly, I felt that it was easy, uh, and it was easy because I had good people working for me. I had some really excellent agents, intelligence analysts, program managers, and even administrative folks that were just in it all together. It was like a team, right? And they did the hard work. But on the political side, yeah, it was always a bit difficult. However, when you're a manager of a federal law enforcement agency overseas, what's critical is to have support from your ambassador or your deputy chief of mission. And fortunately, I just like I said, luckiest man alive. Both in Colombia and Mexico, I had great support from both my deputy chiefs of mission and my American ambassadors. They were terrific. Bill Wood was the ambassador in Colombia, and Tony Garcia. I'm sorry, Garza. Tony Garza was
Mm-hmm.
the ambassador in Mexico, and just both of them were fantastic. And I write about them in the book.
Yeah, I know.
You
He
know,
wrote the
I write.
recommendation for you. I read that.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. We ended up accomplishing quite a lot together, and it goes toward. I mean, you're doing it. At one time of the day, 1 hour of the day, you're approving, a secret investigation to propose to the ambassador, using undercover operations or other methods or techniques that aren't generally accepted within the country itself, the country's laws, and then 2 hours later, you're talking to congressional members, senators and U.S. House of Representatives, and trying to convince them to send some of the assistance money through INL, the State Department support for anti-drug work, and convincing them to further support. I mean, it was a fun job. It really was a fun job, but it took a lot of patience. And I think what I was able to do is look at the hard work and the success of those agents and other personnel that were succeeding every day, because I had worked there, and I'd been in Hermosillo, I had been in San Jose, Managua, Nicaragua, Guatemala. As an agent, I knew how difficult it was to run around surreptitiously and covertly and actually accomplish a few things and get things done. So I was lucky to have good people.
Excellent. Excellent. Go ahead, Jeff. I've been talking. So you got
better
layperson questions for Dave? Or?
I'm taking notes. But
Okay.
I think I understand most of it right now. So
Okay.
when my dummy alarm comes off, I'll pipe up.
Where do you think I know we all hear about the fentanyl. When I worked, that wasn't, I couldn't even spell it for you back then. What do you think this future,
Right.
what do you think the future is for narcotics in the United States? Because this fentanyl and all the other drugs that are, they're not the marijuana, cocaine, heroin that we all got used to. Where do you think this is heading as far as society and efforts to combat it coming in?
Yeah, I'm really worried. This fentanyl has become the true poison that could completely dismantle American culture. Um, why do I say? Because it's killing somewhere around 100,000 U.S. citizens a year. Uh, that means that 100,000 U.S. citizens are taking a chance. They don't know if there's fentanyl in it. They don't know they're committing suicide, but they're trying to take, the Adderall, Percocet, Vicodin. They think they're taking a pill that will relieve them in some way or some fashion, and it's going to wipe out an entire generation. So this might not be something that we really see true ramifications for the next 15 to 20 years. But when that happens, there's going to be a missing generation. And I mean, listen, it's going to affect everything, right? It's going to affect people who can volunteer for military service. It's going to affect people who can support Social Security. If they're dead, they can't have jobs and they can't support Social Security, which is for other people in the future. So, I mean, this is going to have some severe long-term ramifications for our country. And I hope that we wake up and see how important this really is. I don't mean to be, the bearer of bad news, but we're in big trouble here. If we don't turn this thing around pretty quickly, I think we could suffer in ways that we don't even imagine right now.
What's the course that you would suggest with something like fentanyl?
Well, I talked about it in the book a little bit, and that was toward the end of the book with regards to our national drug control policy. And I said we have to give everything that we've got into stopping the flow of false prescription medicine and fentanyl. I talk about the marijuana issue. I don't think marijuana is good for you, and I don't think marijuana is going to get any easier to deal with, because the percentage of the THC is becoming more and more potent. But I don't think being a federal responsibility is necessarily helping our country right now. And the reason I say that is because it's almost like the abortion issue that has already been decided by the Supreme Court. They sent it back to the states, right? I think they should send cannabis back to the states, let states enforce it, regulate it, legalize it, decriminalize it, whatever the hell they want to do. But in federal law enforcement, we have to look at what's really degrading our society. And that right now, my friend, are hardcore drugs, including fentanyl. So we need to put our best resources into this problem. We need to focus on its flow across the border, which is a very current political issue, I understand. And we got to put everything we can into it, man. I would love to even see maybe the military doing some kind of intelligence gathering support to us, because most of it is coming across the border. Most of it is coming across our southwest border. The fentanyl is imported into Mexico from China through, take your pick, the corner of cross and don't walk, the walk and don't walk. I mean, every country you can imagine, but it ends up in Mexico. The labs are in Mexico. It's stamped. It looks like a regular Adderall or a Percocet, Vicodin pill, and then it's fired all over the border into the United States. And there's no way we're going to be able to stop that unless we put every resource we have into it. And then we have to hold these people responsible, right? It has to be a holistic approach where we deal with the Mexican government, difficult as it may be. And we also have to deal with some kind of intelligence collection capability, both, well, DEA, Customs, ICE, FBI can handle it in the US, but we have to figure out a way to do it overseas, right? We have to get some major intelligence in terms of locking out those labs. Now, maybe DEA, I've been retired since 2011. Perhaps DEA knows where the labs are and Mexico's not doing anything about it at a large level. But that was the case with methamphetamine. I can tell you that in the early 2000s. We were able to tell the Mexican government that there was a methamphetamine lab that would manufacture, I don't know, 500 kilos per 48-hour production cycle. And it would take them 2 months to react. And of course, when they did, they had moved the lab to another place. So that's what we're dealing with here. Very difficult, Jeff. It's a hard question to answer.
So do you like if we know like the fentanyl is mainly coming from China, like do we have to wait till it lands in Mexico before the DA can do anything, or is there any way to intercept it in between the foreign countries? Like how does that work? Do you kind of have to catch it in our court or close?
Well, no. I mean, DEA's reach is global. So if we were able to identify where the load was, and of course, keep in mind that it's always a load of fentanyl is not going to be, I mean, 1 grain of salt in fentanyl can cause an overdose, right? So if you take a 44 pound barrel, 44 pounds is relatively small. Let's call it a pony keg. You could take that full of fentanyl and you could hide it in a load of 47,000 pounds of flour that's coming from India, from China through India into Mexico. You'll never be able to find it, right? Unless you have the informants or you have some kind of method or technique that reveals of that smuggling conspiracy, you wouldn't know it. There's no way that detection is going to catch that kind of movement. And then once the fentanyl is in Mexico, you take 44 pounds of fentanyl and then you can, cut it 3-4 times. I don't know. Tell me, Toby, perhaps 20 times, and it still have an effective high in whatever pill that is consumed in the United States. Sometimes even creating overdoses at the tune of 100,000 people a year. So, real problem. People have to focus on this, right? Number one, and I said this too in the book, demand must be reduced, right? And I don't know how we're going to do that. People need to know not to take drugs. That it's more so than ever. I mean, when Toby and I were running the streets of Miami in the 80s, we thought this was the worst of the worst. I mean, that pales in comparison to the fentanyl threat right now. I never ever saw 100,000 people dying per year because of a single drug. And that's what we're up against now. I mean, it's far worse than it ever has been. And I feel terrible about that because we committed our careers to it, 25, 30-year careers. But I look at it, I hope Toby does too, is that, hey, maybe along the way we saved a few lives. And that's what we wanted to do.
That's exactly right.
Right? You're never going to stop it altogether.
Yep. That's the whole thing. But what you said, there's two interesting points that you made, and I commend you on this. Number one, it begins in the people not wanting the drugs. I mean, you'd think that if you saw this with all these 100,000 people that have died from this, it would be a deterrent, even for somebody that's experimenting with drugs in their teens, early 20s. That seems to be the target use of that. And I know that would scare me off. Until it hits home, you got a cousin who died of it. Most people think, oh, this ain't going to happen to me or my family. Yes, it always does. Drugs have always affected, I don't care if you came from a military family, DEA, customs, whatever, there's a relative that did drugs. There's somebody that did that. So it's affected everybody. And the other thing I found interesting is that you said about the marijuana. With that, do you think that with the states regulating it, and I know we all know there's blue states, red states, conservative, liberal, that it'll be that people will actually move out of a state because of the legalization or go to it, have a migration like that. That would be horrible. So I guess my question is, do you think this is going to lead to, it's still a Schedule I drug, or marijuana, right? Or is that changed?
That's right.
Okay. If they move that, then it would go to the states, just like abortion, and they can decide that whole aspect of it. Okay? But I'll give you an example. When I was a police officer in Massachusetts, okay, they just ruled, the governor's office there, that anybody that had a record and they haven't decided the amounts of the drugs or anything, they could get it wiped off, like totally sealed and expunged. And that may happen with that too. And you and I both know there were some people that, and the smugglers, but mostly the street dealers, that stood on the corner and sold heroin, cocaine, and marijuana, that they affected these people's lives. I just think if that happens, it's got to be carefully planned. Just some theories I want to throw out at you.
Oh, I agree 100%. I mean, if there still needs to be some federal oversight, maybe Food and Drug Administration, or some agency that looks into the regulatory aspect of whether cannabis is proper in the state, is being properly managed in the state. But I just don't see it being a federal law enforcement responsibility any longer. Number one, because we have fatter fish to fry. We have this fentanyl problem. We have methamphetamine. We have heroin, opioids. All this. I mean, there are only so many of us, right? I mean, I don't know how many DEA agents there are today. I doubt that there are more than 7,000.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Far more Treasury agents, but then, you have how many statutes does a Treasury agent, an ICE agent, have to be focused on? I mean, you may have 40 or 400 statutes that you're focused on. So my point is that we have a lot to do, and I just didn't see that we should be too focused on cannabis right now. Although, like I said, I don't think cannabis is the answer. I don't. It's not aspirin, folks. and it's not a beer, you know. I mean, they're talking about the THC levels surpassing 95% these days. I mean, when I was in high school, it was 3 to 5%, you know, of whatever you would smoke, you know, that ditch weed. But now, I mean, it's really something that can make a difference in how you live your life, you know, and how successful your life is. It's like anything else, right? Alcohol, it's a drug, right? If you drink it in moderation, that's one thing, but if you abuse it, it's going to affect your life. So I'm really worried right now, though, about the fentanyl, and I have been for some time. We've got some people that are working very hard to bring awareness to it, including the parents of fallen children. And when I say children, I'm talking about anybody between 15 and 45. I mean, it's a wide angle of deceased that have died from fentanyl overdoses. So we have to keep a close eye on it, man.
So would the cannabis make more sense like in a ATF scenario than a DEA?
Well,
Focus?
ATF is also a law enforcement agency, but you mean with regards to the firearms being a more of a having some regulatory
Yeah,
oversight.
and making sure that there's actual commercial licensed, companies and stuff, trading and having some sort of regulation on that, right? Taxation and stuff.
DEA actually does. Yeah, that's a good point, Jeff, because DEA already has a division called diversion. Diversion. And what they do is regulatory and cyclical oversight for prescription medication. I mean, United States doctors, pharmacies, they have to work with DEA in order to prescribe, the scheduled drugs that they need to support, their medical practices. So yeah, that's a concept that actually could be applied. Is that you use like a diversion type of model to just make sure that the states are regulating the cannabis production and the distribution in the way that they're supposed to be. Now, there are a number of arguments out there in opposition to this idea. Number one, that drug traffickers are never going to obey the law, right? They're always going to be out there in the national parks growing weed. They're going to influence and threaten other legitimate growers and things like that. But uh, like I said, let the states figure it out. I just don't see where federally we have the time to truly look. I don't think, and from DEA's perspective, and I could be wrong, but I don't. While I was there, we weren't really focusing on pot. We were focusing on fatter fish. The fentanyl, the methamphetamine, the heroin, the cocaine. Uh, just pick from the buffet.
Is that
The biggest problem
is that
The
because
biggest problem is our demand.
is
Our demand.
is that because the violence associated with the trade itself, or the danger of the substances?
Well, in fentanyl, it's the danger of the substances. It's the high rate of overdoses to death. And I mean, when you're talking about methamphetamine, that results in a number of violent crimes, domestic issues, domestic disputes, arrests. Spouses are beating spouses. Spouses are killing other people. It goes on and on, man. There's a lot more for us to look at in terms of the small resources and the ammo that we have to work with, right? And I don't know. I agree with Toby that marijuana, and some people have, some of my fellow agents have brought to my attention that what was very helpful with marijuana arrests, federal arrests, was that 3 strikes and you're out, right? So if you were able to grab a trafficker, that was in possession of a half a pound of pot, and he had 2 or more prior arrests, you give him the 3 and you're out, right? And then that's a harder sentence and keep him in jail for longer. But I don't really see that as a solution. I think that's more I mean, it is a solution, but it could be a solution on the state end and not the federal end, because we're becoming awash in this fentanyl threat.
Yeah. I just wanted to comment that the creation of task force with the border issue would be good. I mean, we touched briefly in the beginning about cross designation. And one thing that we had is we had Title 21 authority from DEA with Customs, and they had border search authority, which makes a difference. And border search authority is if you follow a load into the United States or narcotics, you don't need a search warrant as long as you have that in view and can place it. And a lot of times there's there's delays in getting search warrants for whatever reasons. It can be an assistant U.S. attorney who, doesn't want to act on it quick enough. It can be the judge. It can be a lot of things. So it was a very, very useful tool that we had, and Title 21 was great. And the most important thing is camaraderie among the people you're working with. You don't want to have adversity. Competition's good, fun competition, but you don't want it between enforcement agencies. You want them together, and you want to be able to solve the issue. And I think if they create these kind of things with fentanyl, it'll at least start in the right direction. So I just wanted to commend you on one thing before we go. This book is great. And the first chapter will blow you away. And I'm not going to discuss it. He knows it. He lived it. He's a brave man. Okay. And one of the agents who was involved in that became the head of Miami office. But it starts you right out. So I'll just want to pay you a compliment for that. If that got people's attention, it got mine right away, because I was looking and I said, this is going to be like the big cheese over the office and sack and, down in the country attache, the head of global operations. But it starts out like that. And it paints such a relevant picture for anybody that has any interest in law enforcement in 1980s. Okay.
Well, I'm buying it. You sold me.
See, you got a sale today. Come on.
Hey, Jeff, you and my mother. That's two.
Well, I'm not going to check it out of the Toby library. I'm going to get a copy.
Yeah.
Take my time.
I appreciate it. No, it's done well. I mean, it's actually gotten some very, very fine reviews and some positive responses. So I feel blessed. Yeah. And all I wanted to do was tell the story, right? Like Toby knows, it's a perpetual play date. It was the best job that I could imagine. It was fun.
I have one last proposal. That I have his book. I hope you have mine somewhere.
I do.
It's less pages. You can read it at the beach. That's what I tell Pete Throne. But I want you to come down. We're going to go to Tobacco Road. We're going to sign each other's. But I got to warn you, the Tobacco Road is not what it used to be. It is now. Oh. Remember, the parking was like, park for free or $5. It's now like New York, like the design district down there. And it's like 25 to $30 to park there. Yeah. The Death Burger is cheaper than the parking, if you can believe that. Okay?
Yeah.
And Paul Pelletier, right? The prosecutor. He was an ASA. Very tough. He came down there. He lives in Washington. He came down there and we met there, and he's like, I can't believe how expensive this is now. And I said, yeah. I said, it's changed a little bit over the years, but I want you to come down when you're in Miami. We're going to meet there, Dave Gaddis. Thank you.
If you spoke to current AUSAs, assistant U.S. attorneys, or even current federal agents today, and you tried to explain to them what Tobacco Road was like in Miami at that time, It would be like trying to explain to somebody today what an 8-track tape or even a 4578 LP record was like, right? They trying to teach a 11-year-old what that was like. It's totally different. I mean, it truly was once in a lifetime historical moment that you and I were able to grow in the cocaine cowboys era at ground zero. There was no comparison, and we're really lucky, amazingly lucky to have been a part of it, and we are also lucky to have survived it.
Yes. Yes. Even though our hair colors changed a little bit over the years, but that's life.
I haven't lost color. I've just lost the hair.
Well, I'm working on that now. It's going away, but what can I say? I had it for a long time.
Mine's just migrated south. Yeah.
Yeah, but you got the peaky that's covering it. I like that. Hey, Jeff, listen, read the book. If you see some chapters that you like, we can get back on the call again.
We're going to do
I
this
love
again.
this, guys.
Absolutely.
This is so much fun.
It was fantastic.
And I'm sure we're going to have a ton of comments. So next time we get on, we can maybe answer some of the viewers' comments and, keep it moving.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Let me know anytime you want to get together. This was a lot of fun.
Okay.
You're good people.
See you at Tobacco Road. Take care, Dave.
Appreciate it, Dave.
Bye.